G'day and welcome to the Gaynor Show. I've got another bumper episode for you today. Safe Schools is back in New South Wales. I'll be talking to Mark Latham and Kira Smith about that a bit later in the program. We'll be looking at Chinese military recruitment campaign advertisements and comparing them to Australia. And of course we'll have Goose of the Week, but we start in Victoria. Now, there is a sickness in Australia. It's spreading rapidly, it's infecting the old and the young. It's taken a particularly heavy toll on the media and politicians, but it is not COVID-19. Instead, it is a mental disease that manifests in extreme paranoia, irrationality, and an intense craving to restrict freedom. The epicenter of this strange and contagious mental derangement is in Victoria. Victorians are now living in one of the most government-controlled societies on earth. Most cannot travel more than 5 kilometres from home. They must wear masks. They cannot go out after 8 p.m. The border has been closed and business is severely restricted. It is now illegal to pay someone to mow your lawn or clean your house. The police have said they will come after you if you do. Carpooling banned. Schools are shut to most students and businesses cannot operate unless they are a permitted work premises. Workers must carry around a 2-page permit that must be produced on demand and which identifies them, their boss, their workplace, and their work roster. Some food items are rationed. There is no sport, no church, and no family visits. People I've spoken to are having difficulties just getting their kids' homework to school or being allowed to travel to feed their farm animals. No one really knows why any of these arbitrary restrictions help prevent COVID-19, and they don't, that's obvious. Throughout this pandemic, Victoria's had the toughest restrictions of any state by far. It is also the state with the most cases by far. If anything, this suggests that draconian government restrictions are making things worse. All of this sounds like the kind of thing that happens in tin pot dictatorships overseas or during time of war. But we are not at war, and this is very much happening in Australia. And it is all happening because about 350 people have died from the Wuhan flu. 350. Almost all of them were over 70, and many had underlying serious health issues. It's worth contrasting these numbers to some real disasters that Australia has faced. Yesterday, we commemorated the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II. More than 39,000 Australians died in that war. 30,000 were taken prisoner. Many, many more were wounded. And on the 18th of August, we will commemorate Long Tan or Vietnam Veterans Day. More than 500 Australians were killed in that conflict. All up, 100,000 Australians, mostly men by you, have given their lives since 1914 to defend freedom. Almost all of them died overseas so that other people in other nations could live free. As a nation, we have always taken pride in this self-sacrifice to help others. It was called the Anzac spirit, but we don't have it anymore. In the twinkling of an eye, freedom has been stolen from us here, right under our very noses, because of a completely irrational fear of COVID-19. In effect, we have given up life to avoid a very, very small risk of death. And it has been done by decree, without consultation, and with most of the basic functions of democracy suspended. There is no effective parliaments and even less opposition. And the mass media is busy tut-tutting away, happily creating fear and panic with sensational stories that don't provide all the facts, while applauding our new state dictators. Here's one fact the media is not reporting. Last year, according to the Australian government's influenza surveillance report, 290,000 Australians got the flu. Just over 700 Australians died from it. So far this year, there have been just 20,000 cases of the flu in Australia. 36 people have died from it. We are now approaching the end of 2020, and there is a very high chance that the total number of COVID-19 and flu deaths combined this year, in this year of panic and paranoia, will be less than the number of people who died last year from the flu alone. Now, I'm not making these statistics up. You can find them on the Australian government website, but you won't hear about them in the mainstream media. It's too busy applauding lockdowns. But these lockdowns are taking a terrible toll. More than 1 million Australians are now out of work. Suicide rates are expected to jump. Tragically, because every suicide is tragic, in 2018 over 3,000 Australians took their own lives. This is expected to increase by almost 15% over the next 5 years. Best case modelling from the University of Sydney published this week forecasts more than 19,000 suicides between now and 2025. 19,000. This modelling also predicts that there will be over 173,000 hospitalisations for attempted suicide or intentional self-harm between now and 2025. Remember, these figures are from the best case model in which youth unemployment does not rise above 19%. If these models are accurate, then the expected death from suicide will dwarf the number of COVID-related deaths in Australia. And these models do appear to be accurate. In Victoria, there has been a 33% increase in the number of young people arriving at hospital after intentionally harming themselves over the past 6 weeks compared to the same period last year. The COVID lockdowns are affecting lives in other ways too. A Victorian doctor I spoke to this week has told me that people are avoiding important medical treatment because they are fearful they will get COVID-19 if they visit a hospital or a surgery. So much for saving lives. The irrational media coverage of this disease is actually causing people to avoid medical care. And death is part of life too. However, due to COVID restrictions, elderly Australians are now dying alone, forcibly separated from their families. Who knows how many, but it is probably in the thousands or even tens of thousands. And this tragedy is compounded by the extreme restrictions on funerals. No one can attend them in Victoria, and it was like that for the rest of the country too for some time. This is no way to live. It is also no way to die. And while politicians may have initially and even understandably overreacted when COVID-19 first emerged, it is now clear that their cure is far worse than the disease. It is also clear that their cure has far more to do with increasing their powers over every aspect of our life than saving lives. COVID-19 is dangerous, yes. It does kill, yes. But politicians like Daniel Andrews are killing this country, and that is far more troubling. Staying on COVID-19 and in Victoria, it must be pointed out that the Victorian government's failed quarantine program has been a complete disaster because it was designed not to prevent this disease, but, wait for it, to employ minority groups. It was reported in The Age this week that, and this is a quote, the decision to use private security guards at Melbourne's quarantine hotels was partly driven by a well-meaning attempt to provide jobs under social inclusion policies. Now, I'm not sure what The Age means by well-meaning. As far as I'm concerned, any bureaucratic program that prioritises minorities over effectiveness is not well-meaning at all. In fact, it is just the opposite. The article went on to state that the Indigenous-owned security company, Unified, was given the contract because it satisfied the Victorian government's social inclusion procurement policy. It has now been revealed that the Victorian government was offered ADF help for its quarantine program, but it decided to go woke instead. As a result, guards were hired via WhatsApp, they received no induction, no training, and no protective gear. It is laughable. What could possibly go wrong? In fact, that's probably a question Dictator Dan should be asked. Just don't expect a response. This was his response when he was asked about whether it was true he was offered ADF help to support his quarantine program.
But again, could I just, with the greatest of respect to you, I'm not in any way criticising you for asking the question, but in my judgment, I've just spent more time on that issue than I should, because I've got a lot of other very, very important things to get on with.
Daniel Andrews says there was no offer of ADF help, and now he doesn't want to answer questions about this. It's not hard to understand why. He claims that there was no ADF help on offer. Those claims are so fantastic and false that it's almost got to the point where I'm embarrassed for him. We know that Victoria was offered ADF support, and that's because that's exactly what Daniel Andrews told us back in March. The website for the Premier of Victoria contains a press release from the 27th of March titled Enforced Quarantine for Return Travellers to Combat Coronavirus. This press release states, following agreement by the National Cabinet, all travellers returning from overseas to Victoria will be placed in enforced quarantine for a self-isolation period of 14 days to slow the spread of coronavirus. This press release then goes on to outline in some detail the enforced quarantine measures before also stating it has also been agreed that the Australian Defence Force will be engaged to support the implementation of these arrangements. Strangely, ADF personnel were never engaged. Instead, Victoria prioritised the social program based on social inclusion policies. 5 months later, and Victoria is the only state in Australia with a COVID-19 problem. It's worthwhile asking how this occurred, and the answer to that is easy to find. Victoria is paying very large sums of money to people to make very woke decisions. Indeed, right now, the Department of Justice and Community Safety is advertising for a Director of Inclusion and Intersectionality, whatever that means. Now, these are some of the requirements of the role: providing strategic leadership to implementing the department's inclusion and intersectionality agenda, providing advice in relation to inclusion and intersectionality, driving the development and delivery of a coordinated, contemporary, and evidence-based intersectionality framework, which provides a clear narrative that elevates inclusion and overtly addresses intersectionality, implementing a department-wide collaboration inclusion strategy, including an LGBTIQ justice strategy, a disability action plan, and a cultural diversity plan. There are no real training requirements listed. No education or experience is necessary. The only requirement is that you need to be highly credible with diversity networks in Victoria. And the salary, it's a cool $192,000 to $249,000 per year. Think about that for a second. And then think about the million Australians looking for a real job. It is mind-boggling. You may have thought that safe schools had been banned. Remember this? This is a news clip from 2017 explaining that this program, led by the open and proud communist Ros Ward, had been scrapped in New South Wales.
These are some of the parents who felt the Safe Schools program was inappropriately pushing their children to question their gender identity.
I think puberty is a really difficult time to be exploring these issues and certainly to be making lifelong, life-changing decisions.
In a statement confirming the axing of safe schools, Education Minister Rob Stokes said bullying will never be accepted in New South Wales public schools, whether it be because someone is overweight, gay, based on the colour of their skin, or for any other reason.
Well, the Safe Schools program went a little bit further than what it was initially designed to go. And there's been a lot of discussion about making sure that we have programs that are broad-based programs.
The Safe Schools program was introduced by the Gillard government, rolled out when Tony Abbott was PM. Today, he welcomed its demise, describing it as a social engineering program dressed up as anti-bullying. Federal Labor had pledged $6 million to keep the program going.
It is important that children go to school and are not bullied on the basis of their sexuality.
Since 2014, 135 schools here have delivered the program in classrooms. Since then, referrals to the Children's Hospital at Westmead for gender services have reportedly tripled. Critics say that's because the program teaches children they can identify as male, female, or both, regardless of their sex at birth. The state government is still drawing up its new anti-bullying strategy due to be rolled out in Term 3. Brian Seymour, 7 News.
Unfortunately, Safe Schools is back bigger than ever. In fact, New South Wales One Nation MP Mark Latham has uncovered evidence that there are possibly hundreds of Safe Schools type courses being run as part of teacher training in New South Wales. Some of these courses encourage teachers to get children as young as 3 or 4 years old to role play same-sex marriages. It is disgusting. It is also mind-bogglingly dumb. This whole program rests on the premise that people who are stupid enough to think that a boy can become a girl are smart enough to teach your children. Mark Latham has introduced a bill into New South Wales Parliament to address this farce, to ban gender indoctrination in schools and reassert the right of parents to teach their children in matters of morality and values. I applaud him on that, but I am left wondering as to why this was left up to Mark Latham instead of the supposedly conservative Liberal National Government, which is actually running the state and overseeing its education system as it crumbles in this madness. I was fortunate enough to be able to interview Mark about this situation. This is some of what he had to say.
Well, I think any parent would be very concerned about some of the information you spoke about in your second reading speech. For example, you mentioned some of the courses coming out of Western Sydney University that have students role play same-sex marriage at preschool. Can you elaborate on some of these programs?
Well, there's one of these outfits, a provider, Multiverse. They applied for accreditation for preschool teacher training for play with clay and storytelling. So that's what they were ticked off to do, but it ended up being an exercise in political indoctrination. Anyone can go to the Multiverse textbook. It's called Anti-Bias, and you'll see there advice that everything about the preschool classroom should be set up to make it comfortable with gender fluidity, that the dollhouse should have transgender characters in there, that stories should change the characters to introduce transgender characters. I suppose Goldilocks and Cinderella end up being transgender boys under that advice. And then at page 60 of the textbook, it says that if you see some little kids doing a mock wedding, a bit of play, where a little boy in a mock play environment is marrying a little girl, step in. This is not instruction, it's an intervention. It's policing the play to step in and say to the boy, you can marry another boy, and set up that scenario, and say to the girl, you can marry another girl, and drag a second girl in and do the wedding that way. So, you know, this is a sick ideology where little kids 3 and 4 years old who've got no sexual instincts or awakening, that doesn't come until the puberty experiences, that preschool teachers are told to jump in, to intervene, to manipulate the play, to encourage the notion of same-sex marriage and, I suppose, sexuality diversity, as they call it. Now, when you're doing that to little kids, there's something gone wrong here, hasn't there? I mean, the notion of kids playing is one of the great innocent, joyful aspects of our life, and parents should be horrified that this mob, who had an accreditation for play with clay, are instructing along the lines of telling teachers to put their queer lens on. That's the material that we know about, put your queer lens on. So again, it's the deception of this, that Safe Schools was never about anti-bullying. Multiverse instruction, from what we can see, hasn't been about play with clay. These are indoctrination programs that take little kids and put them in indoctrination camps.
Now, stay tuned to GoodSauce.news. The full interview with Mark about the re-emergence of safe schools in New South Wales, even in the Catholic school system, will be published by GoodSauce.news this week. You will be shocked by what he has to say. Of course, Safe Schools does not just destroy children's minds. These programs also have devastating impacts on the lives of those they confuse. Many young people, especially young women, can be left physically scarred and unable to have children after embarking on a flawed sex change program. This is incredibly sad. Kiralee Smith from Binary has worked hard for the last 2 years campaigning against radical and dangerous gender ideology, and I also spoke to her about the very real problems these programs cause in people's lives this week.
Now, you spoke about it being a dangerous ideology. What impact does gender ideology have on lives? Can you go through, I guess, some of the issues that are not really addressed in mainstream media?
Well, I mean, that's a massive question, Bernie. It impacts people on so many different levels. Of course, there's the individual, the family level, then there's the community and social and political levels. So we're seeing at the moment, a lot of people may have heard or read about what's called rapid onset gender dysphoria, and we're seeing what that means basically is like there's a trend, particularly among teenagers and particularly among teenage girls, which is very out of the usual for what has, you know, there's always been transgender people among us or gender diverse people among us. And generally that was adults choosing to identify a particular way and not imposing that on the rest of the society. However, in recent years, and particularly since the degendering of marriage, this has become just a worldwide phenomenal trend of influencing teenagers, and we're seeing girls who once would have been described as tomboys or lesbians even are now identifying as transgender. Unfortunately, what we're also seeing is a huge amount of those girls who are now regretting going down that pathway of medicalizing or having medications or irreversible surgeries, who are regretting that decision. So on that level, that's devastating, it's harmful, it's tragic. to look up and follow any of these people on social media is absolutely heartbreaking. Then you've got the family level where families are being torn apart because even here in Australia, in some states, principals have more authority than parents when it comes to their own children. So if a child goes to the principal or to the school and wants to be called by a different name, identify as a different gender, the principal and the social workers in that school often have more authority than a parent and are able to endorse that child's desires without having any intervention from specialists, psychologists, doctors, or the like. And that's very, very alarming. Courts in Australia can grant authority to those children and to schools or to other carers as well. So parental rights are really being threatened. And unfortunately, I'm contacted by many families who are impacted by this, whose children are being, separated or divided from the family unit and are not getting the support from the family that they need to have. That we all know families are the best place to have that nurturing, that encouragement, and that help through some very difficult times during their teenage years. We're seeing it also at a political level and a social level. Women's sport is being hugely impacted. There's a massive debate going on in that realm where Sport Australia and the Human Rights Commissions are actually recommending that sporting organisations accept and actually enforce that, particularly where a male sports person wants to compete as a female, that everybody should embrace that and accept that. And that's to the detriment of women. It creates an unfair playing field, and it often creates a very dangerous playing field in some of those sports. So it's absolutely staggering. There's been a few politicians who have spoken out about it, and a few female politicians who have spoken out about it, who have been absolutely attacked, bullied, harassed, intimidated by the LGBT community, or activists, more like it, sorry. And it's absolutely horrifying to watch what's going on. But we're seeing it, the debates going on in schools, the debates going on in public policy. In New South Wales earlier this year, Gladys Berejiklian and the Minister for Women refused to define what a woman actually is and allowed a male to be eligible and a finalist in the New South Wales Women of the Year Awards. So it blows my mind the way that this ideology is infiltrating every area of our society.
It does blow the mind that the state of New South Wales earlier this year came dangerously close to awarding a man an award for being a woman. The full interview with Kiralee Smith from Binary will also be up on GoodSauce.news this week. Don't miss it either. And I encourage all of you to support Mark Latham and his bill to ban this insane and dangerous ideology from New South Wales schools. Militaries all over the world advertise for recruits. It's what they always have done. Some of them do it better than others. A nation that is serious about its security and winning wars will advertise one way. A nation that is not will advertise another. Now, this is a recruitment campaign that has just been launched in China. Have a look.
我是谁？
懂吗？
我是母亲倚在门口牵不到的那只手。
车神非常主张平时他都已经在。
我是妻子舍不得挂掉的电话。
哎，你再讲会儿嘛。喂，老公，你什么时候回来啊？
我是儿子眼里不敢靠近的陌生人。我是亲人的牵挂与骄傲。
我宣誓，听党指挥，听党指挥。
我身后是和平，我面前是战争。拿起钢枪，就要放下儿女情长， 穿上军装，就要舍弃舒适安逸，征战疆场，男儿本色，从军报国，此生无悔。我是中国军人，我是人民子弟兵，我是美好生活的守护者。
Whatever you might think about the communist Chinese regime, you have to admit that that particular ad was hard-hitting, and it sent a message. China is serious about winning wars, and it wants Chinese soldiers who are prepared to do the hard yards, whatever it takes to do just that. Meanwhile, this is what Australia is doing to recruit soldiers.
When I went on maternity leave, it didn't push me back with my cohort at all. I'm pregnant now, and yeah, Army has been very flexible.
I do have a few friends that have taken maternity leave in the past couple of years. There is also paternity leave for fathers as well. There is quite a few different leave opportunities for them.
The Army pregnancy uniform, it's got, I guess, Velcros where you can adjust as you get bigger.
They were able to come back from maternity leave and still have their job. They have said to me that the support that they have received has been fantastic.
I think my teenage son's latest favourite word succinctly sums that second video up. Lame. And while you're pondering how the Commonwealth spends millions of dollars every year to serve up the most uninspiring defence recruitment campaigns possible, also ponder this. There are 46 million more males than females under the age of 54 in China. Right now, 18 million of them are under the age of 14. That's 46 million men who will never have a wife. They will never have a family. They will never find the happiness that a stable marriage brings. That is a lot of trouble brewing inside a single nation. I think we should be betting that one day China will send those 46 million men somewhere else to find a wife. I would also not be betting that we'll be able to stop them with a defence force that prides itself on boring advertising and maternity leave programs. Remember when the mostly peaceful protests started in America and how the violence was orchestrated by right-wing extremists? That was obviously a lie that no one believed, but it didn't stop the mainstream media from peddling it.
The NYPD says the majority of the violence that we have seen this week is initiated by agitators coming in from out of state and inciting violence. 7 on Your Side investigator Dan Kraft took a closer look at who is getting arrested and what some are doing to stop the spread of misinformation.
Close to 700 people arrested in the New York area alone last night. Many of the protesters were peaceful, but businesses continue to take precautions for the ones who are not.
While many are showing up wanting their voices to be heard, others are smashing windows, starting fires, and looting stores. From New York City's wealthiest neighborhoods to its poorest, police say it's not all random cases, but also organized attacks. Twitter has suspended the account of a white supremacist organization they say was posing as a far-left group accused of putting out wrong information to incite violence.
Well, now the BLM movement is not even pretending anymore. It's defending its involvement in the looting and sacking of Chicago last week.
We got this thing! We got this thing!
What you just saw was an Audi being used to smash through a shopfront window so that it could be sacked by hundreds of Black Lives Matter peaceful protesters. Ariel Atkins is a prominent BLM activist in Chicago. This is what she thinks about this type of behaviour.
Care if somebody decides to loot a Gucci or a Macy's or a Nike, because that makes sure that that person eats. That makes sure that that person has clothes. That's reparations. That is reparations. Anything they want to take it, because these businesses have insurance. They're going to get their money back. My people aren't getting anything.
Reparations? Right. I think I need some reparations too. Tell me again how people who have an Audi need to loot the Apple store to feed themselves. For her blatant foolishness, Ariel Atkins is my Goose of the Week. but we can thank her for at least telling the truth. The BLM movement is anything but peaceful. Give her a round of applause. That's it for the Bernie Gaynor Show today. I'd like to put a plug in for Dave Pello, who is working incredible hours behind the scenes to produce and bring you all the content on GoodSauce.news. He's doing a great job, and none of this would be possible without his hard work and efforts. If you missed the excellent interview with Mark Drury on GoodSauce earlier or last week, make sure you go and check it out, especially if you want some understanding and insight into the threat that Islam poses our Western society. And stay tuned this week, there's plenty of great content coming up. Make sure you click like, make sure you share the posts, and if you can, please sign up and support with donations on a weekly, monthly basis to keep GoodSauce.news going. Free speech is not free, and without your help, Good Sauce simply cannot continue.
The Bernard Gaynor Show is a production of The Good Sauce, hosted by Bernard Gaynor. To watch, listen to, or read more content without the SJW PC fact filter, visit GoodSauce.news. Good, SAUCE.news. Become a Good Sauce supporter for exclusive access to live and unedited interview recordings, including the conversations before and after the show.